There are 1,000 stories in the envisioner's future. This is just one of them.
Well, hello, how are you doing? It is Wednesday evening at 6 o'clock and I'm Dave Coplin. This is The Rise of Humans and we have got a very fine show for you tonight. We're going to be talking a lot about the environment, about what's happening around us today. And when I say the environment, I'm not talking about the planet. I'm talking about how we're coming out of lockdown. But before I do, one of the things I've been thinking a lot about recently is I know over the past few weeks, we've talked about a whole range of different things. We've done mental health and well-being. We've done productivity. We've done education. We've got more on that coming later. And it's been hard for people to say, well, what is this really about? What am I going to get from this? And this is what I want to be really clear about. The value proposition for what we're doing, The Rise of the Humans, is about the future of work. And you're going to get some really, really good insight if you are a business leader. So if you're looking about how you grow your business, we're going to be talking primarily about the things that you're going to need to do, especially to look after the two most important people in your life, and that's your customers and your employee. If you're a team leader or a manager, I am telling you right now that you are not going to get through the next few weeks, the next few months, unless you fundamentally change how you think about leadership and management. We're going to help you with that. We're going to do lots of stuff on that. If you are an employee, if you are an individual in the world of work, the next few months and the years ahead are going to fundamentally change for you. The things that you've done to get you to where you are today are going to change. You're going to have to do different things. We're going to have to learn new skills. And we're going to help you with that. We're going to bring you people who can have that conversation. And finally, and it feels a bit left field, but it all works out in the context of the future of work, is if you're a parent. And if you're a parent and you're thinking specifically about, well, hang on a minute, what skills do our kids need if they're going to be successful? Because the skills that they're being given today may or may not help them out. So we're going to be here. We're going to try and answer those questions. We're trying to give you the guidance that you need to navigate your own way into the future of work. That's why we're here, and that's what we do. This week, we're going to have a really interesting conversation. We're going to go back. We're going to talk to some old friends, and we're going to talk about the difference between a wedding planner and a surfer. Stay tuned for what that's all about. But actually, this is really about how we embrace a very new way of working. We've got some fantastic experts in there. Before we get into that, just a couple of bits of promotion. I was absolutely delighted to be able to do some work with the Cosmic Shambles guys. So this is Robin Ince and the whole of production company who sits there. They do book shambles, they do science shambles, the whole stuff. I did some stuff at Christmas, which you know about, but I also did a piece with Robin very recently that comes out tomorrow morning. It's a podcast with Robin all about the rise of the humans and what we're trying to do. And let me tell you, Robin Ince has to be one of the nicest people I think I've ever met. Really genuinely lovely guy and a great conversation. So tune into that if you can. In slightly less exciting news, but equally interesting, the webinar that we did last week for the Institute of Facilities, Workplace and Facilities Management, which is a more exciting community than I'm guaranteeing you're thinking it is. That went live last week as well. So there's a great podcast that you can listen to there. Before we get stuck in, as ever, it is beholden to me to say thank you to our sponsors once again, the fantastic Treble 3. Again, for all of your digital print needs, not just digital print, but digital and print. They do amazing things. They're very busy right now, changing 2 meters to 1 meter plus for all of the people that need it, or helping workplaces be ready and be prepared for all of the things that they're going to do. You know that they've helped me, and I just thought I'd bring you this other little thing. It's just not just COVID signs they do. They also create these fantastic, had these made up to stick around the house. If you imagine how well I'm liked in the household at the moment. I stuck one up in the kitchen the other day just to try and get rid of the phone zombies. Anyway, treble3.co.uk. You know them, you love them. They're there to help. Give them a shout, and actually we're always grateful for their support. So look, without further ado, let's get stuck in, right? This is the world that we were in 12 weeks ago. It was a pretty busy place. There was lots going on. We, in our personal lives, were frenetic, we're busy. I don't know how many of you, but I have noticed a distinct difference in my weekends now between how they are now and how they were before. And these were times when typically I was thinking I was doing nothing. I was chilled out. Well, actually, I was running around. I was doing groceries. I was taking my son to places that he needed to be. All of these things compared to now, where actually it's a very still moment. And actually, I think there's a lot we've got to learn. I'm not sure that we should be heading straight back into this world of busy, because as we're going to find out, being busy is not the world's best place to be. And instead, we should be thinking much more like this. And there's an analogy that our fantastic guest, Tony Crabbe, has talked about and talked to me about the wedding planner versus the surfer. And the wedding planner is somebody who plans everything to the minutiae of detail. They go through, everything has to be perfect. And the surfer, meanwhile, actually is more about, I'm going to take the best wave that's available to me and I'm going to make the best possible use. Tony wrote about it in his book, Busy. And I'm not kidding you, right? And I'm not just saying this because he's on the call. I don't think there's been a more profound change in how I've thought about productivity than what I got from reading this book. And actually, really, this concept about the surfer. I approach every single day as an opportunity. Look, it's going to be imperfect. Something inevitably will go wrong. There will be new stresses that I haven't anticipated. But rather than break when those happen, I'm going to find a way of bending. I'm going to find a way of actually trying to just do the best I can with what I've got available. It's fundamentally changed how I think about the world of work. And why is this important? Well, this is important because I think most of us are going to be in a world of work that is not going to be our old world of work. We're not going to be running back into the office. We're going to be living with the imperfect situation that we're in at home. We're going to have dogs barking, kids that need looking after, other things that we need to do, the complexity of no more commute, or am I at work or am I at home? Well, the office is kind of in the back of the back room, so maybe you guys watch a movie and I'll sit and all of that stuff is going to exist. And I don't know about you, but a number of people I talk to, and we're worried about this sort of thing, this whole thing about productive, the ticking clock. Oh my God, I've got to get more done. Oh, there's another meeting I should join. These are the hallmarks of our old way of living and our old way of working. And if you think about, being desperate to get back into the office and the challenge that we're going to have there, let me tell you that the poor facilities management guys, this is the kind of scenario that they're having to plan out now. It's a return to the whole cubicle farm. It's a very different kind of environment. We're certainly not going back to open plan offices and open plan desks and all that sort of stuff. So my question today for our panel, and I'm going to introduce them to them in a second, is, given all of these things, given the fact that we have fundamentally had to reset our thinking as a global society, not just in the UK, not just in individual organisations, as a global society, we have been given an opportunity which has changing the way we think about the world of work, about the skills that we need, about the technology that we use. What are we going to bloody do about it as a result? What are we in the weeks and months and years ahead going to do that will enable us to look back in pride and say, do you know what? That was a terrible time in 2020, but it gave us an opportunity to do things that were never before possible. And on that note, let me bring in our panel. You know him, you love him. We have the fantastic Mr. Nick Morris. Thank you for joining us, Nick, once again. And with the world, I think he's at sea level is basically how that picture works out. He's sort of sitting below us. Is Tony Crabbe, author of the fabulous book. Tony, we are delighted to have you with us.
Pleasure. Nice to be here.
So let me tell you a bit more about Tony, and this will set this up. So Tony wrote this book, and I've talked about it, and I love it, and I urge you need to read it. And Tony lives in Spain, and Spain went into lockdown about 2 weeks before the UK went into lockdown. Tony's response to lockdown was to pick up his book and think, well, actually, do you know what? There's a bunch of stuff in here that I think could help people. And, Tony's a little bit me, because his starting point would be exactly what I would have done, which is, do you know what? I reckon I could probably tweak it. I could fudge a few of the pages, put a bit of COVID in. It'll be fine. No one will notice. It will be a good book. But of course, he's better than me, right? So he got stuck into it, and then he thought, no, actually, I'm going to have to completely rewrite the book. So tell me a bit about that, Tony. You're in lockdown. You're in the chaos that is ensuing about how we all understand what's going on, and you're saying, well, hang on a minute, I'm just gonna write another book. How does that work?
Well, actually, it came because the publishers approached me and said, we got this great idea. And initially I thought, no chance, but overnight I reflected on it, and it just felt like stuck at home behind our walls, all nice and safe with our cupboards full of toilet rolls. It just felt like something I could do. And as you said, we thought initially it would be a repivot of the book, pull out some of the stuff that was relevant. But when I actually looked at it and looked at the challenge, it felt a little different. So of course, it took me 16 days to write it, 200 pages, which was it's the most intense writing I've ever done. But I can only say it was because it felt like I was doing something that could be a useful contribution. And I don't want to overplay this purpose stuff, but it kind of felt like a purpose.
Well, look, I understand your position about not wanting to overplay it, but I've read not all of it yet, but I've read over half of the update. And it's fantastic stuff. And I think about all of the questions that I've had in my own experience in lockdown and the experiences. And when I say experiences, I'm talking about the moments where you think, shit, what am I going to do now? Or how do I deal with this? Or God, this is really weird. How do I make sure that I'm still doing right by, my family, by my work, in a world where everything seems to be collapsing around me? And genuinely, the book has a lot to help with that. So I think that's fantastic. Let's just to open the conversation up a bit, I think, go into this whole thing about productivity and the whole sort of the notion of busy. I think it's probably important for the audience, for people who haven't come across it yet, to really talk about, surely being busy is a good thing, right?
No. The reality is, if you think about what's going to drive success in the future, it is no longer getting things done. In the kind of factory mentality that we've had in the past, it has been fundamentally about doing more things faster, and we play the more game. But that's not where success comes in an attention economy, in the world where we're desperate for innovation and transformation. And even if you think from a corporate perspective, we no longer need the things that will drive value aren't execution, aren't delivery. It's going to be transformation. It's going to be imagination, especially in a post-COVID world where everyone's going to figure out a new way for it. And I think part of the problem with busy is, we tell ourselves, somehow we've made an association between success and importance and busyness, which is kind of dumb. It's also a set of bad habits where we reach for our phone first thing in the morning. They put people in an empty room for 15 minutes with nothing to do, apart from one, which was to give themselves a painful electric shock. And most people shocked themselves because they had nothing else to do. We're hooked on this world of hyperstimulation. And it's also, quite frankly, it's the easy option. One of the first questions I used to get asked after the book came out is, but what about me? You say busy is a choice. But I've got, I'm a single parent. I've got 7 children. I run 3 multi-million-dollar projects. I've got a dog with leukemia, and my mother-in-law is coming to stay. And they kind of paint this picture of lack of choice. And yet we know psychologically that that's the path to learned helplessness. And actually, when you scratch beneath the surface, what tends to happen is there's always a difficult conversation, a difficult choice that lies behind our acceptance of busyness.
Nick, I want to bring you in here because you always used to talk to me about being busy, and where that goes. And that's something that you can relate to from your world.
Yeah, and I think that there's a huge amount of stress that goes along with that as well. Previous company I worked at, we used to talk about, I think the stat was 40% of work that we did was the work itself, and 60% was work about work. And that's kind of terrifying. The former chief executive used to say, well, that's Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday gone with 60%. And you've only got 2 days left. And not that you're going to eradicate the work about work completely, but imagine if you could reduce it. I think that the other thing that we do is that we fill our time because we're scared to have empty space. And I think designers will tell you that you shouldn't be afraid of white space. And maybe that's the same for our calendars as well. We fill our time in case people are looking at our diaries and wondering if we're doing enough. I don't think anyone looks at my diary. I don't think they're that bored. We fill our time because it makes us feel more worthwhile. We put meetings in. We've talked about this issue before, just to kind of to make us feel like we're contributing. When do we get the thinking time done? When do we get the work itself done? Too often it's after hours, it's weekends, and that can't be healthy. That can't be the way that we should do things. My wife often says, "You talk a good game, but when are you going to actually, do this yourself and spend less time a slave to email and a slave to the laptop, and be more in control of our own timing. I think we know inherently that this is the right approach. Honestly, and the first thing I'm going to do is download the new version of the book. I don't know how to do it, and I don't think many people know how to do it either.
And just on that, Tony, and then I want to get to you on that. I think there's a fallacy that we sort of propagate, especially in the technology industry, is that this is easy to do. Just work from home. Work flexibly. I'm kidding. I'm a bloody expert in this, right? I've spent 10 years trying to figure it out. And I've only now recently just got to the point where it's close enough to almost working. But, because we think about it in the context of just this sort of narrowed relationship between me and work, when actually it's a very broad relationship. It's between me and the rest of the world, specifically, my family, the other things I do. And Tony, how do you break people into that? How do you encourage people to open up to that sort of thinking, to get to a place that they can start to figure out what genuinely it needs to be done, and what actually could be left?
Well, the starting point is, one of the things that we know is there are two types of goals, implicit goals that people have. We have preventative goals and promotion goals. Preventative goals are about trying to stop bad stuff happening, and a lot of busyness, even to Nick's point about what will people think if I'm looking out the window, it's kind of not culturally appropriate just to sit and think. And 83% of people say they do no thinking each day. So there's, a lot of stuff is driven by avoiding people having bad views. And then promotion goals, which are actively pursuing things that matter, that you're passionate about, etc. And research shows persistently pursuing positive goals makes a huge difference. So even in lockdown, even when you're working from home, actually setting yourself some goals. And one of the things that we know historically is people have more flow moments, if you like, in the office than at home. But that's because goals are often set in the office. But that doesn't mean we can't set them at home. So we've got to kind of think about our mindset. But another thing is, a lot of the rhythms that we've had before going into working fully from home have served us well. They kind of, leaving to go to the office kind of cues us into the state of getting ready for work. Leaving at the end of the day, whatever time we leave, cues us into switching off. And without those, it's one of the things we have to work out is building a rhythm into our day that allows us to switch on to work, but also to switch off. There's data that shows that in the US, people are working on average 3 hours longer since lockdown started. And that's because they're not disconnecting.
Look, I love that. And we were talking about some similar stats from LinkedIn did a survey about a month ago, and it was showing in the UK and Ireland, I think it was, people are working an extra week every month as a result of being in lockdown. Look, what I think is really important, and again, this is where I want to get a bit punchy now on the sort of the whole point about why we're having this conversation, is, we are having this moment where, the offices are opening and potentially we're going back, or we're going to be sort of learning things. And we've been doing this long enough where we've been able to notice the intangible things that make part of our experience. And you talked about the routine of commuting, setting us up for going work, and equally the routine of commuting home, and that actually enabling us to re-enter sort of domestic life. And we've also talked about things like the chance encounters that you have walking down the corridor in your office and bumping into people. And what I think is really important in this conversation is what we shouldn't be doing is saying working from home sucks because we don't have these things. We should be saying, well, actually, these cues are important. So how do we build them? What are we going to do that? What is, it's really important for me to delineate work from, personal time. So what am I going to do as a result of that? That has to be, I think, part of our narrative, right?
And it's about intentionality. Even take what collaboration, you talk about collaboration, the amount of time we collaborate has doubled over the last sort of decade, more or less. So, the unit of work has become the team in many respects, and working from home, we have to deal with that. And there's a lot of research that shows, virtual teams can be less effective, etc. And there's some really nice research that looked at something called virtual distance, the kind of emotional detachment that can happen when people are apart. And the point of it all is, it doesn't need to happen. While virtual distance has a huge effect on performance, on trust, on innovation, it doesn't have to happen. but we have to be intentional about making human connections to people, working a bit harder at shared context. Those things don't happen. The same about switching off, switching on. The same about negotiating boundaries. And actually, one of the things I find personally difficult is it's one thing to prioritize between different tasks at work, but when I'm prioritizing between helping my daughter with her physics homework and working on that project, kind of cross-boundary prioritization is harder, but all possible if we're intentional.
No, exactly. And it's funny, you just hit a nerve there, because I like the you know, it's always difficult when you're talking about stuff in the context of coronavirus, because on one side people are dying, and I'm about to tell you my worst experience in lockdown is when John came down for some help for his homework, and I was in the middle of doing something, and I said, not now. I feel terrible about, I mean, he's lovely, he's like, no, it's cool, but actually I got my priorities really wrong in that moment. But it is this expanding boundaries of what, you know, encompasses the things that I have to get done. It brings me back to that whole concept that you talk about of productivity, and we haven't really talked about the to-do list, and I'm not sure if we really need to, but how, you know, problematic the to-do list can be, because it creates a whole bunch of things that don't necessarily need to be there. But it's just being mindful about all of these goals and being able to switch the context. And, you know, these to me are the hallmarks of being a good employee. And that sounds a bit trite. I don't mean it like that. But if you think about the skills that we're supposed to acquire, and all of the etiquette that we're supposed to have about how we approach the world of work and what you do, these are the things, right? These are the things now that we've got to learn going forward, because they're the things that are going to make a difference. I think team leaders are going to be in a situation where they want to know that their team are rocking, you know, not being in the office all the time. And I hesitate to say all the time. Look, at some points you will be in the office. But if we can help people build those skills and understand those boundaries and deal well, look, they'll do better at work. And all right, it took me a while, right? But even I think they'll be better in their relationships as well. And why I say it took me a while is, like, the worst part of my flexible working is I was entirely flexible to work for the first few years, completely inflexible to my wife and family. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. So it's about figuring those things out and making sure, which is why I think this is so hard when we talk to people and we say, yeah, well, you just need to work flexibly. This is part of that challenge, right? And we've got to help people navigate through it.
Dave, let me throw one thing in as well, which is a sort of a negative before we get to the positive. And not that being self-employed is easy. And there are very different pressures, especially at the moment, about where money's going to come from. And you know, I can't begin to imagine that. But the difference between being employed and self-employed are huge. And that ability to work flexibly. There's a brilliant piece in the FT last week around paranoia, and you know, this has been a really tense time. It's been scary. People have been concerned not just for their health and their families, but also for their jobs. And that whole kind of, do you know what? I feel like I need to go and have some thinking time. I need to block out half a day because I want to be creative. I want to go and find myself. I want to do a mindfulness course. When you're feeling paranoid about your job security and everyone else is kind of trying to show up as much as possible without actually being able to show up, then there are some real challenges there as well.
Look, without a doubt. And there are two things on that, Nick. One is the self-employed thing, and I think there's a very different dynamic. But the last part of what you said made me think about one of the biggest barriers, I think, to making this work successfully. And we've talked about it before, it's this whole bloody presenteeism that we're seeing now, where actually, you know, and a lot of it is because I'm fearful for my job, and a lot of it is because I'm less confident in what I'm doing. So I'm going to say yes to every bloody Zoom meeting that you send me because I want to make sure that you see that I'm physically there. And I worry about I mean, we already know, and Tony, I don't know if you've seen stats on this or can sort of bring any to mind, but about the increase in stress that we feel by permanently being on a camera and being on a call versus doing a bit of meetings and a bit of work. Has there been anything in that space, Tony, that you've come across?
I've not come across anything specifically about being on a call, but there's a couple of things that trigger there. There was one study that showed that 45% of people were experiencing signs of burnout within 4 weeks of lockdown starting. because of all the various pressures and the juggling that you talked about, as well as this sort of pressure. And part of it, look, Carol Dweck years ago did some research before she came up with growth mindset, which she's famous for. She was researching over two types of motivation, which are performance motivation and achievement motivation. And performance motivation is all about keeping other people happy. The kind of goal is to look good in front of others. Achievement motivation is focused on the right outcome, the long-term stuff. What I think has been a big increase in since lockdown started is people reverting to a much stronger performance motivation, driven, I think, Nick, by what you were talking about anxiety. How do I demonstrate I'm performing? One woman that I was reading said, it's difficult to persuade anyone why I can't be at a call at 10 o'clock at night because everyone knows I can't go out. And there's this kind of pressure to be present and just to join these things that I think is really potentially toxic.
Do you know, Nick, doesn't that remind you of, remember the research we did about email, and it was the culture of organizations who would be sending emails with the expectation of a response, out of hours. And that was how they were measuring your engagement with the organization. And I can remember specifically, actually, Nick, us targeting that, because these are the things that will prevent us from being able to work in this way, right? So I'm if you're in an organization like that, then I think you need to call it out. If you're a leader that does things like that, then I'm calling you out, right? Because you are not going to be able to grow. You're not going to be able to provide an organizational culture that will support the kind of transformation you're going to go through. And I'll go even further to say, I reckon you'll have a tough time surviving the next few months and possibly. And I know that's a bit harsh of me, but I'm increasingly feeling that we've been given something very, very special off the back of something very, very terrible, which sets us up to really push forward in terms of what we can do. We had Tony, a guy, you may know him actually, a guy called Aidan McCormack a few weeks ago, and he did a lovely job of talking about this being the sort of the final, death knell of the industrial era. And our opportunity now is to emerge from the flames, Phoenix-like, into something that is truly representative of the 21st century. And this is our time, right? But we've got to help people do it. So let's pick the people who are going to struggle with this in particular. I think we talk about them all the time. It's the middle managers, the people who are well-meaning, trying to do right by the organization, try to do right by their team, but lack the confidence or skills or to be able to make that happen. Is there anything, Tony, that you would offer to them to help them on that path?
Well, I think there's a few big risks for managers and leaders, by the way. The first is the natural thing to do at a time like this is to want to exert control. We naturally revert to trying to kind of take control, which leads us into more top-down control, whether it's from leadership or whether it's from managers. And yet we know from the research, there's abundant research after the financial crisis, that the most agile organizations, the ones where power was distributed most widely, were the most successful. A second thing I think is that there could be a real worry that there's going to be a reversion to efficiency, to getting things done quicker and cheaper and cutting costs, as opposed to really focusing on adaptation, innovation, and some of the kind of the stuff that we desperately need to drive success in the future, and which is what success is going to be all about in the midterm to long term. I think there's a real worry that automation gets more about displacing people rather than leveraging the best of machines and the best of human. And finally, I've got a big worry about short-termism. I was working with a big telco the other day, and they've got a real problem with their managers of trying to raise their heads above the immediate. So strategic focus has disappeared, and there's been a 27% cut in investment in diversity. So there's kind of, while we've got communities affected by kind of, like in the States, we know women have been really badly affected by COVID. And so there's, the worry is that in the focus on kind of short term getting through, some of the kind of the longer term stuff that we know is going to drive success and innovation doesn't get focused on enough. And there's some of my concerns I've got for both middle and senior managers.
Yeah, well, and I think, part of the narrative that we've all got to have from our respective places is how to help people open their eyes. But it is tough. I mean, I get that, right? I mean, and again, I always come back to my lovely guys in the hospitality industry right now. Getting through the next few weeks are the most crucial time. However, not that there isn't a point getting through the next few weeks, but if we get through the next few weeks and we're not ready to then take that next step and to emerge into that longer term strategy, then it just gets to be really, really problematic. And I think,
and that's my biggest fear. That's my biggest fear, that nothing changes. Everyone's talking about how the world is going to be completely different. My worry is it's remarkable. In the middle of the financial crisis, think back to how much, none of us believed the financial system would look even vaguely similar following the financial crisis. And lo and behold, it looks almost identical. People look at their habits that they've developed in the crisis and think, well, I've developed these beautiful habits. Habits are enormously context dependent. My biggest worry is we do not leverage this crisis. We don't learn from it.
Look, I couldn't agree more. And so I'm going to do two things here. That's the job. You guys on this call, that's your bloody job, right? Going forward. If you've bothered to tune into this, or you're watching it at whatever time, then I'm asking you, you have to be part of this too. You should be saying to your managers or to your leaders or to your organization, what are we going to do? What are we going to learn? And pushing the boundary, because that's how we get through this. And again, the reason that you're listening to this, unless you think you're clicking on some gadget show, by the way, I'm really sorry, but we're not one of those. That's why we're here, and that's why you're bloody here. I'm going to get a bit shouty, sorry. So let's make it happen, right? We're here every week. We're pushing this message out. I'm going to just say thank you to Tony and thank you to Nick for your time. It's just been, this has been I feel like very invigorated now. I'm going to have to go and send a few emails off that make me sort of feel better about trying to change the world. But come with us on that journey. Thank you. We'll be back next week with more of this. We're going to be looking at what we can do and where we can go, and about how you can learn the things that you need to do to make the most difference to, not just the people around you, not just your family, but to your organization and the success of the business you're in. This has been The Rise of the Humans. We've loved having you with you. We will see you next week. Give us a like if you've liked it. Give us some feedback if you don't, and subscribe where you can. We will see you next week. Thank you so much for joining us.
There are 1,000 stories in the Envisioners' future. This is just one of them.